was recently flown out to Bungie to play and record a lot of content in the Edge of Fate, and I'm really excited to be sharing all of that with you guys. I want to start off by saying thank you to Bungie for the opportunity, and I also want to say that all of the numbers here are subject to change as this is a pre-launch version of the Edge of Fate build. All of that being said, what I wanted to focus on first and foremost were the insane changes happening to the armor and weapon systems. How you interact with these systems, how you go about farming armor and weapons, and just like how you approach the game systems in general are going to be changing very drastically. Your old weapons are still going to be useful, your old armor pieces, like you can still use them, but the new stuff, especially underneath this new system, is going to be much more powerful and much more attractive. And I'm really excited to break that down in a very analytical way today. So I want to go ahead and start with the brand new armor system. So just like weapons, there are going to be 5 tiers of armor now. When you start off in the Edge of Fate, you're going to be a very low light level. And that means that you're only going to be able to do very low level activities. Very low level activities drop very low tier armor, somewhere in the tier 1 range. And this means that this armor will not be as good as armor that you get from much higher level activities. So you can kind of think about this right now where like regular level activities don't give you that great loot, but if you do something like a Grandmaster level activity, you are more likely to get like high stat armor and higher light level stuff and that sort of thing. That is still how the game works, but it's broken down into many more sections, and Grandmaster is no longer the last section. Ultimate is. So, for instance, in this first half of the season, you're going to be able to get up to light level 450. This means you should be able to do a lot of Grandmaster level content within the season, and Grandmaster content drops mostly tier 4 level gear, and will occasionally be able to drop you tier 5 level weapons and armor. But why does this matter? Like, why do you care what tier your armor is? So if you look at this tooltip in game, what it shows you is that different armor based off of the tier that it drops will have a different number of total stat points. So tier 1 armor will drop somewhere between 48 and 53 total stat points. Tier 2 is between 53 and 58. Tier 3 is between 59 and 64. Tier 4 is around 65 to 72, which is like the highest end of legendary gear in today's version of the game. And then tier 5 armor will drop between 73 and 75 total stat points, and is also the only type of armor that drops with an extra stat tuning slot. This tuning slot just allows you to like play around with your total stats, so you can take like -5 of a certain stat and put it into +5 of another. And then in addition to that, tier 5 armor will drop with 11 mod energy instead of 10, meaning your builds are going to be able to be a lot more crazy, which is pretty cool. I'm a pretty big fan of this system because it allows you to have a much more deterministic approach into what level of armor you are farming. So you'll no longer run a Grandmaster and get like a piece of armor with 59 stat points on it, which is obviously a huge bummer. You now know if you run a Grandmaster tier of content and you are expecting a tier 4 drop, which comes from that level of content, you are going to be guaranteed somewhere between a 65 and 72 total stat roll on that piece of armor, which is awesome. It means you are wasting way less time when farming good armor. So now you know that higher tier armor gives you more stat points, but what we have not discussed is how the stat system is undergoing a massive change. So the 6 stats that you know today are being blown up, they're going away. And there are 6 new stats, some of which correspond to current stats that we have, and some of which are brand new. So now in Destiny 2 with Edge of Fate, the 6 new stats are health, melee, grenade, super, class, and weapons. And it's pretty self-explanatory which part of the game each of these affects, but they all actually have way more effects than current stats do within the game, and they have a couple other cool things. So, for instance, the current versions of stats, like resilience, only matter every 10 levels. So at 0 resilience you have something, at 10 resilience you have something, at 20 resilience you have something, but it doesn't really matter if you're at 20 or 24 or 27. It does the same thing no matter what. Now, with the new stats, that's not how it is. They are no longer quantized into buckets of 10 points. If you have a single additional point in a stat, that makes a difference now, which is really cool. They also go all the way up to 200, so stats are no longer capped at 100. Past 100, you get additional effects depending on whatever stat you are speccing into, and these give you very game-changing effects. And that's what I want to talk about right now. So let's go ahead and break down all 6 of these stats, starting with the brand new health stat. From 0 to 100, the amount of points you have in the health stat dictates the amount of health you gain each time you pick up an orb of power. So the recuperation mod is now being deleted and put into the health stat instead, which is pretty cool. It also permanently reduces flinching from incoming fire while you are aiming down sight with weapons. And when you surpass 100 stat points in the health stat, your shields recharge more quickly and have additional health when facing enemy combatants. But let's break that down from an analytical approach. One thing that I did that I'm not sure a lot of other creators did was make sure and go through all of these different armor types and look at the exact stats here. So for instance, when you have 50 points in the health stat, you get 35 health per orb you pick up, and you have permanent 5% flinch resistance, which is pretty cool. If you have 100 points in the health stat, you get 70 health when you pick up an orb of power, which is huge. That's a ton of health. And you also get 10% flinch resistance. When you go all the way up to 150 points, you keep that same 70 health per orb and 10% flinch resistance. That'll be the same no matter if you're at 100, 190, 200. It'll always be those same bonuses, but you get the extra effects of having a faster shield recharge rate and additional shield health. So at 150 points in your health stat, you get 31.6% faster shield recharge rate and 14 additional health on your shield. And if you go all the way up to 200, your shield recharges 45% faster and has 20 additional health. So as you can see, these are huge changes. That is not insignificant. That is pretty much a combination of a lot of what Resilience did, the recuperation mod, and the recovery mod all in one, which is pretty insane. However, it's not easy to hit 200 on a stat. And if you're doing that, you have to very purposely farm out high level tier 5 armor with the exact stat splits that you want and use some of your mod slots to boost your stats as well. So you have to very purposely be going for 200 of a stat if you want to get these insane benefits. Now we can move on to the melee stat. From 0 to 100, it reduces your general melee cooldown, like your charged melee ability, and increases the amount of melee ability energy gained from all sources. And when you surpass 100 points in this stat, it increases the damage done by your melee attacks. Now you can notice this yellow highlighted row. I believe that in the build we were playing, the depiction of the stat was actually broken. So I have values there that are the exact same as the grenade and class stats, because I believe that's where it's supposed to be, because the numbers they were actually showing us in game made absolutely no sense. So that's kind of my best assumption at what those stats are going to be, but we can go ahead and start breaking them down. So when you have 50 points allocated to your melee stat, you'll get something around a 35% reduction in your charge melee ability, and anytime you would gain ability energy from any of your mods or any of your aspects, anything like that, you actually gain 56% more charge melee ability, which is pretty insane actually. At 100 points in this stat, you get around a 65% cooldown and 190% more energy gained towards this ability. When you surpass 100 points, you get the added benefits of increased damage in both PvE and PvP. So when you have 150 points in the melee stat, you do 15% more damage in PvE and 10% more damage in PvP. And when you have 200 points in the melee stat, you get 30% more damage in PvE and 20% more damage in PvP. And that's going to be pretty insane with the number of bonk titan builds and synthocept nonsense and worm god nonsense and liar's handshake nonsense. This might actually be super, super powerful. So it's something I'm definitely going to be keeping my eye on. But let's go ahead and move on to the brand new grenade stat. So from 0 to 100 points in this stat, it reduces your grenade cooldown and increases the amount of grenade energy gained from all sources. And as you surpass 100 points in this stat, it increases the damage done by your grenade attacks. And in fact, it's exactly the same as the melee stat. So the exact same percent increase to energy gain and reduction in cooldown, but the damage in PvE is actually way increased. So your PvP damage increase, you can see at 150 points in the stat, is still around 10%. At 200, it's still around 20%. The same that the melee stat was. But in PvE, if you have 150 points within your grenade stat, you get 32.3% more damage. At 200 points in the stat, you get 65% more damage. The amount of times that there has been a busted fusion nade or storm nade build is absolutely absurd. And I think this is going to be broken almost immediately. I'm very interested to keep my eyes on this stat in particular. But let's move on to the fourth stat, which is the super stat. So from 0 to 100 points in this stat, it increases the amount of super energy gained from all sources, and as you surpass 100 points in this stat, it increases the amount of damage done by your super, yes, in both PvE and PvP. So once again, the energy gained is exactly the same as the last two stats. So when you have 50 points in the super stat, you get 56% more energy gained from all sources whenever you would gain super energy. At 100 points and above, you gain 190%. Exactly the same. The damage is where it gets really interesting. So at 150 points, you get 22.3% more damage via your super in PvE and 7.4% in PvP. And at 200 points within your super stat, you get 45% additional PvE damage, which is pretty insane. When you look at these stats, it becomes pretty apparent why they're implementing things like the not swap modifier. Because if I can just switch to a different set of armor that has 200 points in the super stat and just do 45% more super damage, and then switch to like a grenade one that is doing insane more amount of grenade damage, like that can get pretty broken pretty fast. So I understand why they're taking this approach. Alrighty, two more stats to go. Let's go ahead and talk about the fifth stat, the class stat. From 0 to 100 points in this stat, it reduces your class ability cooldown and increases the amount of class ability energy provided by all sources. And as you surpass 100 points in this stat, you gain an overshield whenever you use your class ability. I'm sure that will not be super annoying in Crucible. Anyways, this is pretty much the same as the other ability stats for the cooldown reduction. So at 50 points, your cooldown is 35% faster. At 100 and above, it's 65% faster. The energy gained is also exactly the same at 56 to 190% faster between 50 and then 100 and above points as well. The overshield is very interesting because at 150 points within this stat, your overshield that you gain whenever you use your class ability is about 20 health, and at 200 points into this stat, it's at about 40 health, which is pretty insane. So might be a very, very powerful thing to use in combination with Bolt Charge, for instance. Kind of an interesting slant to gameplay. And then the final stat is the weapon stat. This stat does a ton. So from 0 to 100 points in the weapon stat, it increases your weapon reload speed and handling speed, and increases weapon damage against minor and major combatants. Then, when you have more than 100 points in this stat, it increases the chance that ammo bricks will give you additional ammo, and increases weapon damage against bosses and guardians in Crucible, which once again, I'm sure will not be controversial at all. It's important to note though, they said they didn't want this to be oppressive, they just wanted it to feel more forgiving. And in order to get above 100 and all the way up to 200 points in the weapon stat, you have to like very deliberately build for it. And you're gonna be losing out on a lot of other bonuses as well. So we just have to wait and see how that shakes out. So at 50 points, you get 5% faster reload and 5% faster handling speed, and you do 7.5% additional damage against minor and major combatants. At 100 and above points in this stat, you gain 10% faster reload and handling speed and 15% damage increase to minor and major enemies. Then it gets crazy. So as you have 150 points, you still gain those 10 and 15% increases from the last time. But then you have a 49% chance to get additional ammo from ammo bricks. You do 7.4% more damage with primary and special weapons against bosses, 3% additional damage against guardians using primary and special weapons, whereas your heavy weapons will do around 5% and 3% more damage to bosses and guardians respectively. And then if you increase that all the way up to 200 points, you now have a 100% chance to gain additional ammo from ammo bricks, which is incredible. That's like massive. You do 15% more damage to bosses using primary and special weapons, and 6% additional damage to guardians using primary and special weapons. And then your heavy weapons will deal 10 and 6% more damage to boss and guardian combatants respectively. So obviously a lot of huge things going on with that stat. Like looking at these, I don't know what my favorite is going to be. I'm probably going to have builds on all my characters to build into all 6 of these stats, because I can think of like times in the game where all of these could be very important, which is very cool because currently you just spec into resilience and you call it a day. So very excited to have all of these cool nuances. Now we can talk about armor archetypes. So stat distributions are no longer random. on armor pieces. Whenever an armor piece drops, it can be one of a number of archetypes. It looks like currently in the game, there are going to be 6 archetypes to start. And all this means is whenever an archetype drops, it will have a specific stat that's the primary stat, where most of your stat points for that role are going to go. And then you're going to have a secondary stat where, you know, the next amount of points go. Those are always set. And I have a couple examples of those coming up for you. And then the third stat's just random. Of any of the 4 remaining stats, you will get a small boost to a third stat. Usually this breaks down to like your primary stat gets around like 30 points, your secondary stat gets around 20, and then your third random stat gets somewhere around 10. And obviously that fluctuates depending on the tier of the armor and a couple other RNG elements as well. So for instance, the gunner archetype gives you a ton of stat points towards the weapon stat, some towards the grenade, and then my random third stat was healthier, but in reality, I think it can just be like any of the 4 remaining stats that aren't the gunner or the weapon stat. The brawler archetype gives you mostly melee energy with some health stat points. Specialist gives you mostly class stat points with some weapon stat points. Paragon gives you mostly super with melee as the secondary stat. So you can see like there's a ton of these, but every combination is not possible as of yet, and I believe the intention is to add more archetypes to Destiny over time. But there are going to be like very specific combinations of perks that you can target, and the customization is going to come from you like mixing and mashing different archetype pieces of armor, or like really speccing into like using all gunner archetypes to get a ton of weapon stat and a bunch of like grenade stats as well. So it's more deterministic, but also it requires you to like grind a ton, and there's a lot of mix and matching. So it's like more simple, but also more complex all at the same time. And it's something I'm really excited about. Now, we also have set bonuses coming. I believe there are 8 total sets that have set bonuses with the Edge of Fate. These, you know, drop from all sorts of different activities. We got to see 4 of them. Each of these offer both a 2-set armor bonus and a 4-set armor bonus. So if you're wearing 2 pieces of this armor, you unlock the first one. If you have 4 pieces of this armor, you unlock the second one. And this is really cool because it allows you to really spec into like a full set of a type of armor, or mix and match too, which is pretty cool. So for instance, the tech set armor set was one that we got to see. For 2 pieces, you get the Wrecker bonus. You deal significantly increased kinetic damage to combatant shields, overshields, vehicles, and constructs. And on 4 pieces of this armor, you gain concussive rounds, where defeating powerful combatants or breaking combatant shields with kinetic damage releases a disorienting kinetic shockwave. So pretty interesting bonuses there. The next one we got to see are the Aeon Renewal pieces of armor. With 2 pieces, you get Force Converter. After a final blow with any rocket or grenade launcher, sprint for a short time to gain a speed booster. And then at 4 pieces, you gain Reactive Booster. Once per activation of Force Converter, or the other perk, sprinting while at critical health being suspended or being slowed by a status effect will immediately grant a speed booster for a short duration. So this armor set's about like speed running and going fast and getting rid of like the crowd control effects, which is really interesting. The third armor set was the Bushido set. At 2 pieces, you get a perk that allows you to get final blows with freshly drawn or reloaded weapons heal you. And with 4 pieces, bow, shotgun, or sword final blows temporarily reduce incoming damage. Damaging targets with those weapons extends the effect. That sounds like also massive. That's a pretty big bonus that you can get from this. And the 4th and final set we were able to see was the Last Discipline set. This gives you 2 bonuses. For 2 pieces, you get Terminal Velocity, where final blows with primary ammo weapons grant your primary ammo weapons temporarily increased reload speed, which is pretty cool. And then Power Loader with 4 pieces, where picking up an orb of power grants special ammo progress, or just gets you closer to your next special ammo drop. So that's all of the armor changes, and it's a ton of them. I can't wait to dive in and really get my hands on these insane systems once the Edge of Fate launches. But now let's switch over and talk about the tier 5 weapon system. This is way less in depth. Essentially, the higher tier weapon you get, once again, from doing higher light level and harder difficulty activities, means you'll have extra stuff on them. So looking at the tooltip in game, tier 1, just the base stats. Tier 2, you gain enhanced perks on your weapon. At tier 3, you gain extra perks in the 3rd and 4th slots, kind of like adept weapons today, and everything is enhanced of all of those 4 perks. And then at tier 4, your mods, your magazines, and barrels become enhanced. And then at tier 5, like literally everything on the gun, including the origin trait, are enhanced. You have 3 perks in slot 3 and 4. There's a unique ornament on your gun, which is this beautiful like animated blue thing going on here. It's awesome. And there's a kill effect, which could use some work. Admittedly, I gave a lot of feedback on this. I think it's a really awesome idea to have a unique kill effect, but it was kind of disappointing, to be honest. What is really cool is the kill effects, including sweaty confetti, get their own slot on the gun now, so they don't use up your mod slot. It's under cosmetics. But like, if I compare here, you know, sweaty confetti to the brand new like limited edition kill effect, it's pretty lame. So I hope they increase like what happens, because it's kind of hard to tell anything happens. But the idea is really cool, and that ornament is sick. So that is all of the new changes coming to the tier 5 armor and weapon systems. Obviously, it's going to be a lot. I cannot wait. Get ready to grind. If you have any more questions I didn't answer here, ask them down below, and I'll do my best to answer them. And have a fantastic day. See ya.